Good evening and welcome to all of you that are here in person, and of course, all our friends that are logging in online. I feel honored to be able to welcome you here to Chabad of Core Valley and to welcome you to this lecture by Doron Kornbluth. But first, just a few thank yous. Thank you for being here on Zoom and in person. And I also want to thank our event co-sponsors, the Jewish Family and Children's Services, JFCS of San Francisco or the Bay Area, as well as Sinai Memorial Chapel, the Chevra Kadisha, the Bay Area Jewish funeral home that has stepped up to make sure that this educational event could take place and hopefully be a good resource for many people in the community. I also want to acknowledge the wonderful delegation from the board of Sinai. We have the vice president, Wayne Sosnick. We also have the secretary of the board, Joan Laguatan. And it's an honor to have you all here. Oh, okay. And a mourner care counselor for Sinai as well is here. So thank you all so much for joining us. Before I introduce our guest speaker, who's here all the way from Israel, I would like to just share with you how this event came to be. As a rabbi, I get to engage and interact with a lot of different people and a lot of different stages in life. As my father used to say, that rabbis, their job is hatch, match, and dispatch. And that's when people feel like they need to call on a rabbi. And frankly, I've been involved in all aspects of people's lives. But there's one that was always something that was very difficult for me. And that is speaking to people about their plans after they've lived a full life on this earth. To the extent that I had a good friend, very close community member, who took a journey in his older years to get more involved in his Jewish practice. He even identified as a chassid, which means he felt immersed in Jewish practice in a significant way. But he was sick and he passed away. And I just assumed he is going to want to follow Jewish tradition, which was burial. And it turns out he had made plans, maybe 7 or 8 years before his passing, to be cremated. And of course, I realized that I had made a big mistake. I'm a rabbi. I'm here to teach. I'm not here to tell people what to do. I'm here just to share our traditions and share the beautiful, meaningful aspects of life that we can find in our Torah. And I had not done so for this individual, even though it had crossed my mind, but I was too scared to bring it up to him. And it was after his passing that I made a commitment, which was that I'm going to work on trying to educate my community and the broader Jewish community in what does the Jewish tradition have to say about how, not only how we live in this world, but how we live on after we've lived a full life in this world. And it was because of that that I decided that we need to work on educating the public in this way. Now, to be completely open with you, it's a very difficult topic. It's not something that is inspiring to me particularly, and I'm guessing it's not particularly inspiring to most people that are involved with this and making decisions. But that doesn't take away from the importance of thinking this through carefully and learning more about what our tradition has to say about this. I'm not here, and I don't think Doron is here to tell you what to do, but Doron is here, I believe, to educate. So with that introduction, I would like to introduce all of you to Doron Kornbluth, who's come all the way from Israel. Doron speaks in about 50 cities around the world on an annual basis. So this is not his first rodeo, is that right? And Doron is the author of a book that is titled Cremation or Burial, a Jewish View. And this is something that we have copies available here, those that have signed up online and are listening on Zoom. As we wrote that with a donation, you will receive a book in the mail in the coming weeks. Those that are here in person, you can take a book with you on your way out. So without further ado, Doron Kornbluth.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody here. Hi, everybody in Zoom land. Let's just get here set up a little bit. Okay. Can those of you on Zoom, can you hear me? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear. Okay, great. Good. Nice to see you. Nice to see you all. So thank you very much, Rabbi. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. When I'm asked to speak about the subject, I sometimes think of a story that I heard about this older gentleman that is laying in bed, calls his wife over, says, honey, please come sit on the bed with me. Kind of a strange request, but she comes and sits with him. He says, honey, remember when we were in our 20s and I broke my leg and you were there with me? Yes, honey, I was. And remember when we were in our 40s and I went bankrupt and you were there with me? Yes, honey, I was. Remember we were in our 50s and I had my heart attack and you were there with me? Yes, honey, I was. Well, I have something to tell you. So a tear rolls down her cheek. She leans in. He says, honey, you're bad luck. So there are certain subjects that just seem like they're bad luck, they're taboo, they're morbid, we want to talk about them, we don't want to deal with them. Certainly, anything to do with death is near the top of that list. We just prefer closing our eyes and like not dealing with it. It's unpleasant, right? No wonder that it's not an easy subject to raise. So my hats off to you, not wearing a hat, but hats off to you, Rabbi, for hosting it, and to all of you here in person and on Zoom for taking the time to, share some discussion about it and hopefully learn something new about it. The truth is that I never much liked this subject either. I was on a speaking tour. I've been in various forms of education, formal, informal, all over the world for many, many years. And about 10 years ago, actually a little more, about 13, 14 years ago, I was in Florida on a speaking tour. And most of what I teach, or I taught, I think still most of what I teach is nothing to do with burial and cremation. I wrote a book called Why Be Jewish. I speak to teenagers and college students about why it's important to stay connected to their Jewish heritage. I speak to parents and grandparents raising kids, love being Jewish. There's a whole, it's a positive relationships, happiness, positive stuff. I was never dealing with death and dying. And then I'm in Florida on a speaking tour and I open up the Jewish newspaper and there's an ad from a Jewish funeral home offering Jewish cremations. And I'm a traditional Jewish boy from Montreal. I was in shock. I didn't know there was such a thing as a Jewish cremation. Growing up, Montreal, I don't think you've been to Montreal. Montreal is a very traditional Jewish city. And most people go to some kind of Jewish schooling. Most of the shuls are Orthodox. People aren't necessarily observed, but there's a certain sort of traditional structure to it, a little bit like England or South Africa if you've ever visited. And growing up, thank God, all different types of Jews dealt with levels and types of observance. Everybody sort of lived in the same areas and got along well. It was quite beautiful, really. And but there were some things that everybody did. It was just standard. Growing up, every Jewish person that I knew went to shul on Yom Kippur at some point. It was not even question, right? Whether they fast the whole day or not, I didn't ask any questions. But everybody went to shul. That was everybody, did Hanukkah candles. That was just a given. Everybody did Passover Seder. Nobody paid retail. There were certain things that Jews just it was not. And cremation certainly was just unheard of. It was only a generation after the Holocaust. It was just never heard of such a thing. By the way, statistically speaking, if you go back 40, 50 years, no wonder I never heard of it, because it was in the Jewish community very uncommon. By the way, even in the non-Jewish community, it was very uncommon. Today, everything's changed. And now, as of 2017, the majority of Americans who die are now being cremated. It was a minority until 2017. Now it's about, the estimate is about 52-53% right now. It's probably still going up a little bit, but plateauing is getting to a certain percentage. The Jewish community is not far behind. We don't have an exact number of how many Jewish Americans who die are being cremated. There's no way of knowing for sure. There's no way of knowing. I don't know where you're getting that from, but there's no way of knowing. There is no actual stat as far as I know. If you know one, please tell me. The best stat that I know of is an informal survey done by Rabbi Elchanan Zone. You may have heard his name. Rabbi Zone is the head of the Chevra Kadisha in New York. He is the rabbi's rabbi in all these matters. Chevra Kadishas around the world go to him for all their questions. He's an amazing individual that sleeps with the phone beside him. He gets calls from around the world like every hour to like what to do. It's amazing. So he did a study about, it's got to be 15 years ago. Informal study, not scientific, but pretty extensive, of around Jewish funeral homes in the New York area. And he found that 25% of the requests were for cremation. Does anybody notice the criteria of that study? It was almost 15 years ago. Things have changed. That's in the New York area, the most culturally Jewish part of the country, which has a lot of implications. The more Jews around, the more Jewish camps, the more Jewish schools, the more Jewish feelings. It just builds on itself. It's very, very cyclical. And that's people who choose a Jewish funeral home. So when you go to outside of New York, 2023, and especially with a large number of people who don't choose any funeral home, or certainly not a Jewish funeral home, certainly we're talking minimally about 1/3 of the Jewish dead in America now are now being cremated. Some estimate that it's already at 40%. There's no doubt it's just following national trends. So the question that I have is why? Forget about Jews for a second. Let's just talk about Americans, right? 340 Americans, 40 million Americans. Majority of the dead are now being cremated. Unlike when we were kids. When we were kids, it was a very small percentage. It wasn't as small as amongst Jews, okay, but it was still less than 10%. Everything has changed, right? It's gone up tremendous, 500% in a generation. The question I have is why? Why are Americans of all types, all stripes, all religions, all backgrounds, all locations, why are Americans today choosing cremation more than ever before? What do you think? Number one, cost. We will definitely talk about it. What else? Land use, environmental. Excellent.
Transport it wherever they go.
Very good. Mobility issues, taking it with you. Excellent. You guys are.
Live in little shells and you're born and die in town with everybody that generations were born and died with. You know, everybody's spread out. It's hard for a lot of families to go to visit.
Yep.
A cemetery to see their loved one.
Very good. Very good. Anything else? You've outlined already the main ones. Anything else you can think of? Correct. People are what I call discomfort with decomposition. People are just uncomfortable with the idea of being eaten by bugs and all that kind of stuff. Definitely a factor. Anything else you can think of? This is very good. You've gotten like the main ones.
I think it's just family trends. You know, in Oakland, we have a cemetery as a mausoleum that was opened in the early 1900s. The cemetery was opened in the 1800s. And there are some distinct families that have been choosing cremation for generations. It's like grandma and grandpa were cremated, mom and dad were cremated, so I'm going to be cremated. And people don't even think, you know, it's just what they were raised with.
Correct. Yeah. Sure. So what the people here in person have suggested as reasons, correctly suggested, in my opinion, as reasons why so many Americans today are choosing cremation, so many more than a generation ago, are cost, mobility issues. People don't live in the same little village like their parents and grandparents. It's easy to visit a cemetery, a family plot. Discomfort with decomposition. Just on family trends, it's already become a thing. I would actually extend what you said and just say culturally it becomes a thing, not only in the family, but it just becomes, unlike 50 years ago. Now, famous people we hear of, movies, it just becomes a norm, a cultural norm, and you kind of like. You have to have reason not to follow the norm, right? We're very much affected by our surroundings. So all of these are, you've outlined, I think very well, the main reasons why people today are choosing cremation. What I want to do right now is I want to analyze these reasons that you have given, the reasons that people, Americans of all types, are choosing cremation today. We're going to see together that some of them are true. I'm very upfront, I'm very open. I don't believe in hiding anything. Some of the reasons for cremation make some sense. Many of them don't. Some of them are actually completely false. I want to bring them out so we just educate ourselves as to what's the reality, what isn't the reality. So we're going to focus on why people are choosing cremation and what makes sense and what really doesn't, right? We're then going to flip the script, so to speak, and we're going to analyze why Jews for 3,000 years have focused on burial, two different sides of the same coin, so to speak. And then we'll get into your questions and comments and suggestions and discussion. Okay, that's sort of the order of what I want to do together. So the first thing you mentioned, David, was cost, which let's leave that for now. Okay, environmental issues. There are two environmental concerns about burial. One is the use of land itself, just using land, and the other is what goes into the land. Okay, let's treat them separately. Okay, the claim is like this, and it's a very powerful moral claim, a moral argument. The idea is we have a limited amount of land. Land mass is what it is. We have an ever-growing population in the state, in the country, in the world. Why waste much needed land on dead bodies that don't need it? Leave it for the birds and the trees and the playgrounds. By the way, there really is a lot of powerful force behind this argument, because you and I both know that if we did have to make a decision between the living and the dead, what do Jews say when we have a drink? L'chaim, right? I mean, there's no question that if there had to be a choice, we know what we would choose. The question is there a choice? Do you have to make that choice? So, ladies and gents, I actually did the math. I'm not the first one to do the math, but I did it very carefully. My book came out in 2012, and I've been speaking about the subject ever since, all over. Thousands of copies, talks, or articles online, things like that. I have never once been called out on the following statistic, because I believe it is inarguable. Okay, get this. If every American who died, and I'm only speaking to the Jewish community, which is less than 2% of the population, but even if every American who died, that's roughly 3 million deaths a year in the USA. COVID was a little bit more, unfortunately, right? Thank God we have more births and immigration, so the population goes up. But there are about 3 million deaths a year, every year in the United States. If every American who died were to be buried, get this, it would take 10,000 years to use up 1% of America's land mass. I'll say it again because it's so shocking. 10,000 years to use up 1% of America's land mass. And we all know that few, if any, of those cemeteries would last that 10,000 years anyway. In other words, yes, if you want to get buried in downtown San Francisco or downtown LA or Manhattan itself, you have a very big problem. There is no land. But within an hour of every metropolitan area that I know of, I'll even say within every metropolitan area, there is plenty of land. There is no issue of land whatsoever. I can't prove it to you now statistically. You can look in the book, what you're taking with you, or you can just, next time you take a plane, now that COVID's over, hopefully, and we can fly again, look down. There's a ton of land in this country. By the way, environmental groups never talk about this issue. Cremation companies talk about this issue. Their phrase is land is for the living, right? Because it's a powerful argument. It just doesn't add up, and environmentalists are not, there's not an issue. By the way, we use far more land every year building new big box stores, like Walmart's and Macy's and all that kind of stuff, than we do for burials. It's really not an issue. The real environmental critique, let's just leave, is it on this exact point? Yeah.
now get a casket at Costco. So I'm sure there's some irony.
Very good. Very good. He said you can get a casket at Costco, so it's a little bit ironic. Very good. Okay. The real environmental critique about burial is not using land because there's plenty of land. By the way, that's true for North America, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, Australia. To my knowledge, it's the only place there isn't land, that there really is a problem, is Hong Kong, Singapore, and parts of Japan. By the way, there are solutions for each and every one of those. But those are the only places that actually have an issue. Okay, the real environmental critique of burial is not using land, not an issue. It's what goes into the land. Two main problems. Number one, metal caskets. Metal caskets being put into the ground is a legitimate environmental disaster. The amount of energy and metal that is used to forge it, to make it, right? They're fancy things. They're put into the ground. They're rusting for 1,000 years. Disaster, huge, mother of all disasters. It's terrible, right? No question. Number two, embalming. If you're not familiar, embalming is when they remove the liquid, basically the blood, from the body, replace it with preservatives. Number one choice in funeral homes in America today is still formaldehyde. It's from the famous formaldehyde. It's a very strong preservative. Toxic chemicals, 6 to 8 gallons going into the body and then leaking into the ground at some point. The body still decomposes. It just takes a little bit longer, right? It's why do they do that? Well, embalming is basically, there's different versions of it have been done all throughout world history, right? The mummies were embalmed in a certain way. It's a different mechanism, but it was a certain kind of form of it. It started in the US big time during the Civil War, when all the soldiers were down south. It took weeks to get them back up. And they had to like present them to their kin, their families. They started, that became norm. US embalms more than any other country in the world. Legitimate environmental disaster. Terrible. You're directly putting tons and tons of toxic chemicals straight into the ground every year. Anybody notice anything that these two issues, metal caskets and embalming, have in common? What's the thing they have in common? They're not Jewish. We don't do either. Jewish tradition, correct. That's what I'm talking about, right? You'll have individual Jews who do whatever they want. That's not our issue. We're talking about mainstream Jewish tradition. So the Jewish tradition is very, very clear that we're supposed to use simple wood caskets. Some people choose a fancier mahogany, whatever, but ideally it's actually like a simple pine box, right? We put holes on the bottom, earth to ashes, right? So it's the body is still connected to the ground. It's not a break. You know, in Israel, we actually don't use caskets. They actually carry the body in a casket to the grave, but then they take it out and the bodies are buried in burial shrouds and a prayer shawl, talit. The caskets are reused. It's funny when you notice it like the first time, but after that, it kind of makes sense. Like you don't have to, in most places, you don't have to use a casket, even in the States. Certain municipalities require it, certain funeral homes, just for example, green burial places don't have caskets today, right? It's not an issue. So we have no problem with metal caskets. We agree 100% it's a problem, shouldn't do it. Embalming, well, if you want to know why Jews and Judaism are so against embalming, go onto YouTube and watch an embalming for 30 seconds. You will understand within 30 seconds why we consider it a terrible desecration of the body. It doesn't take much thought to realize what's going on. If you've ever noticed in Israel, God forbid, when there's like a terrorist attack, there's this organization called Zaka. It's usually these like ultra-Orthodox guys with like, ribbons and like plastic all over. And they're like crawling up like the lamppost to get little bits of blood in order to bury, right? So we certainly do not embalm, take liquids out. It's good. So environmentalists have other critiques of American burials, how cemeteries are designed. There's different issues, garden maintenance. But by far, the two biggest problems by far are these two, metal caskets and embalming. We don't do either. Judaism has always provided an environmentally friendly thing. Green burial is very similar to Jewish burial. The only difference is it's in a forest, it's a bit more open than a cemetery, but it's actually unbelievable in terms of the practice. By the way, cremation itself is not environmentally friendly. Environmental groups are not in favor of cremation. Why? Just think about it. We're all trying to change our cars to become hybrids or e-vehicles. Cremation uses a tremendous amount of fossil fuels. I mean, it takes hours, right? When I was researching, this subject, that was one of my biggest surprises. I thought that, a cremation is something like a microwave oven. You put the thing in, press a button, and 5 minutes later, you get an urn with ashes. No. A thin person is 60 to 90 minutes in an oven, right? Most Americans today don't qualify as that. 2 to 3 hours. An obese person, which is 1/3 of the population, right, BMI of 30 or higher, is 3 to 4 hours. Right? It's a lot of fuel. Furthermore, it releases toxins into the air. Many municipalities have a rule that you can't have a crematorium beside a school. Ask yourself why. There was an article in Los Angeles Times at the beginning of COVID, at the peak of the problem, that the Los Angeles City Council temporarily suspended air pollution rules for the crematoriums in LA because they had extra bodies to burn. They're normally limited by how much pollution they can put into the air. They didn't have a choice because so many people were dying and they had to cremate 24/7. So they were allowed to suspend air pollution rules, meaning crematoriums are polluters. The worst offender, by the way, is if you're like my generation or older and you have a filling, you might have mercury in your teeth. Now, younger people are not doing mercury anymore, so it's not a problem. But for the hundreds of millions of human beings that have mercury in their teeth, horrible for the environment, like one of the worst problems. Okay, so the environmental critique of American burial is actually largely true when it comes to American burial. It does, but it points towards green burial, not towards cremation, certainly. But in terms of Jewish burial, not true at all, actually. A lot to be proud of. I'm actually very environmentally conscious. I grew up that way. My side job used to be, I don't really do it much anymore, but used to be, I'm a tour guide, I'm a licensed tour guide in Israel. I take birthrights and all groups around. I had a day off actually in the Bay Area a couple days ago, and I went hiking in Bodega Bay, and I went like this. You don't have to convince me, but cremation is not the answer. It's actually the problem. Okay, next. Mobility issues. We used to have, people living in the same town, family plot, parents, with all kind of sweet parents, grandparents, great-grandparents. Today, you have, for instance, Florida has very high cremation rates today, particularly high. Why? Many reasons. One is so many retirees. Where am I going to be buried? Here in Florida, everybody I know is in a retirement home, and they're going to die soon if they haven't already. Back in New York, where I grew up, I haven't lived there for 25, 30 years. I don't even know anybody there anymore. My kids are out west. My grandkids are in college. They're like, where are they going to be? Like, there's no point to have a grave. Nobody's ever going to come here, right? It's a very powerful idea versus taking it with you, right? You can take it with you, whatever. So I want to test your knowledge of Israel. Okay. Thumbs up, true. Thumbs down, false. True or false? The #1 visited site in the state of Israel is the grave of Moses, the grave of the Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu. True or false? It's the #1 site or not? What? Oh, very good. So everybody had thumbs down. I don't know you on Zoom what you did, but it is false. It is not the #1 site or the #2 site or the #3 site. And there's 2 reasons that you could have known it was false. #1, he's not buried in Israel. If you remember the end of, that's good. If you remember the end of the Bible, the end of the Torah, it talks about how it's hard to understand what happened actually. The verses say that he hit the rock instead of speaking to the rock for the water to come out, which seems like that was his sin, so to speak. The commentators point out not so simple, because another time he hit the rock and it was fine. Like it's fascinating. But whatever reason, he did not make it into the land of Israel. If you remember, I think it was the last speech of Martin Luther King Jr., where he says, he's some premonition of his death, whatever it was. And he says, I may not make it there, I haven't made it to the promised land, but I've gone up the mountain, I've looked in. He's taking the imagery directly from the last verses of Deuteronomy, right? That Moses is allowed to look into the land of Israel, is not allowed to enter the land of Israel. Furthermore, as somebody said, we don't know where he's buried. the verse says clearly that the place of burial of Moses was hidden. The commentators explain it was hidden because he was such a great prophet that it might have become some kind of place of idol worship. So now ask yourself the question, has anyone ever knowingly visited the grave of Moses? And the answer is no, not knowingly, never. So just think about it. When he died roughly 3,000 years ago, there was plenty of cremation. You know what, archaeologically? Cremation is not a new thing. Cremation is the norm throughout most societies, most of human history. There were always other ways of disposing of the dead. The Vikings put the body on a raft and lit it aflame. The Tibetans put the body on a tower and let the vultures eat it. There's a million varieties, right? But God did not choose cremation, which was the norm then, even though no one would ever visit Moses' grave. He chose burial because we, in our modern minds, we quite understandably actually, we connect two ideas, visiting a grave and having a grave. And we assume that you have a grave so it can be visited. And if you're not going to visit, why bother having a grave? The most famous burial in the Torah, or maybe Abraham burying Sarah, the most famous, one of the most famous burials in the Torah, the burial of the greatest prophet, the lawgiver Moses, itself proves to us that visiting a grave and having a grave have nothing to do with each other. Even if theoretically no one would ever visit a person's grave, the person should have a grave according to the Jewish tradition. It's an unbelievable idea. By the way, I say theoretically because I've been at this now for 13, 14 years. I'm always surprised by how many families, a nephew, a cousin, a grandkid, gets into Jewish genealogy, gets a little more traditional, and wants to visit the grave. Like, it's actually quite surprising how common it is in families. Maybe not most of the descendants, but some of them. And so you'd be surprised how many people visit graves. But even if not, Moses teaches us that it doesn't matter. We're going to find out why it has its own intrinsic value, even if a grave is unvisited. On the flip side, the mobility issue is interesting because on the one hand, if someone says, look, I want to, take her with me, I mean, how do you answer that? What are you going to say? On the other hand, if it's not an emotional moment, if which is what we're doing right now, education, if you can just sort of take a step back and kind of understand the issues for ourselves or to share with others, this is what, when people come to my talks, there's always that double goal. People have their own questions and people have their own family members, their own cousins, their own parents, grandparents, community members. So I'm trying to give information that would lead to discussion. People can make their decisions on a more informed basis. So on the mobility issue, if you get away from the emotion of it, right? And you just ask a question. Okay, first generation, right? Julie, the daughter, is going to, she was the beloved daughter, so she gets the urns, right? How many urns does Julie have? 2 parents, right? Next generation, how many urns are they going to have? 4. Next generation, 8. Next generation, 16. My point is a little facetious, but like our homes and our lives are not really meant for the long-term respectful safeguarding of cremated remains. It just doesn't happen. At some point, they are gotten rid of in some way, respectful or not. Yeah.
Address the situation in which the family wants their loved one cremated, but then wants to bury the
We'll get there. We'll get there later. Yeah. It's a question, but we'll get there later. So the mobility issue is funny because on the one hand, emotionally, I understand where the person's coming from. And who am I to say yes or no? If this is meaningful to you, it's meaningful to you, right? It's an emotion. On the other hand, I'll just give a few facts that many people don't know. I didn't know until I got into this subject, right? How would I know? How did I even know? A Cohen, a descendant of Jewish priests in Judaism, right? In Israel, they're a little more visible and known because they give blessings on a regular basis during prayers. In the diaspora, it's a couple times a year. They've kind of forgotten in many ways. But if someone is a Kohen, means their ancestors are coming from the Kohanim, from Aaron a Kohen, they serve in the temple. They have certain rules that other people do not have. Again, these can be forgotten or practiced or whatever, but it's just to understand what they are. One of the main things that's in practice today is a Cohen does not go into a cemetery. Exception is their immediate relatives, God forbid, but they're supposed to avoid death. By the way, the high priest, the Cohen Gadol, on Yom Kippur, the holiest day, right? So holiest, supposedly, was supposed to be the holiest person on the planet, and the holiest day of the year, and the holiest place on the planet, right? He would actually go to the mikveh 5 times. Why? Because the mikveh, the ritual bath, is mayim chaim, is life, connection to life, versus death, right? You're supposed to separate from death. So Kohanim have to be extra separate from death. So do you know a Kohen can pick up an urn of cremated remains in Jewish law with no problem whatsoever? No issue, because they have no religious significance, because it's dirt. They cremate remains, they are burned. The body is burned at such a temperature, there is no DNA left. There is nothing individual significant. That's just an example of the mystical importance of it, and the ritual importance of it. Doesn't mean anything. So logically, I can say that to a person. Again, in the midst of emotion, it's hard to it's hard to argue. It's not appropriate maybe to argue. But the mobility issue, it's funny. Every funeral home that I know has a problem with unclaimed cremated remains, because a significant percentage of people don't want them, don't know what to do with them, aren't comfortable with them. I was told recently that in California, correct. Well, it's not that they request and pay for it; they have to, pay for it. It's either you're doing a funeral, burial, or a cremation, and it's then theirs. Either it comes in a free cardboard urn, or they pay extra for an urn. But they don't want them. They don't pick them up. I was recently told that California has a rule that a funeral home after 30 days has to send. Tell me, I don't know if it's true everywhere. Maybe it's municipal. Has to send notice to the family and has to put them in a common ossuary, kind of keep them, because funeral homes in other states have a bigger problem. They don't send them anywhere. They're stuck with them. They have room to keep them. Legally, they can get rid of them. It's not their responsibility. Morally, they can never get rid of them, because they know if you get rid of grandma, what is, so it's an issue. But I'm just bringing it out that we think it's a beautiful thing for carry with us, but for many, it's really doesn't always work that way. So again, the mobility issue, not so strong when you think about it. A few other ideas. We mentioned before, you mentioned family, trend of just doing what your family did, which in certain parts of the country is very strong, in other parts not at all. I extended it to just becomes the in thing to do. Today, it's funny that in many people's minds, burial is old stuffy religion, square, and cremation is the newer fad, cool, hip thing, So personally, it's up to you, but I'm not sure if big decisions like that should be made based on what's in style, trend. I have 5 teenagers. Give me some love, people. 5 teenagers. So my teenagers are always making fun of me. I have these ties that I always get mixed up if they're too thin or too wide, and they want me to get rid of them because they're not in style. And I absolutely refuse to get rid of them in the back of my closet, because you and I both know that in 5 years they'll be back, and they're very nice ties. They're expensive silk ties. What am I going to get rid of them for, right? So styles. There you go. Styles come. Meryl said, styles come, styles go. Cremation, it's not a new thing. 100 years ago, there's a big blip of cremation, right? The Greeks, it comes and goes. I'm not sure if that's the reason to choose, how you're going to dispose of your body. So one last idea that was mentioned was discomfort with decomposition, right? It's kind of gross. And listen, I remember high school labs, okay? I agree, it's disgusting, okay? It's underground, we don't see it, but what's happening is disgusting. That being said, and forgive me, but this is a talk about cremation, so I'm sure you're prepared that it wouldn't also be, all be so nice. A cremation is not the most pleasant thing in the world. For 2, 3, 4 hours, the body is moving, the muscles are expanding and contracting, the brain is sizzling. It is a loud, smelly, violent act. Now, I'm not saying that burial is pleasant. I'm just saying they're both kind of gross and disgusting. They both are. And get this, because when I understood this, it changed my whole perspective. They're both kind of gross, but burial is the natural way of every living thing. Just think about it for a minute. Burial is the natural way of every living thing. Think about it. A seed is planted in the ground, plant tree grows, strong, tall, and then goes back to Mother Earth. An animal is born, runs around the forest, dies, and goes back to Mother Earth. Burial is the natural way of every living thing. This is what nature is. Cremation, on the other hand, is an artificial man-made attempt at control. It's not natural. So they're both kind of gross, but one is the way of nature, one is not. When I understood that, it changed my whole perspective. So when you get down to it, I think we've dealt with them all. If not, I'm glad to, glad to review later. Yeah. Hold on for a second to see if we're going to go. So the reasons that people choose cremation, when you look at them carefully, either they're not true, just environmentally, things like that, or very weak. The only reason, to my knowledge, that actually stands scrutiny in any significant way is cost. And that's a big one. Because most of the time, there are exceptions. You can do a very expensive cremation and you can do a cheap burial. COVID actually reminded us of this. My father passed away in the middle of COVID, and not from COVID, but during COVID. And I'm from Canada. Canada was very, very strict on this kind of stuff. And we were not allowed to do a normal service or anything like that. It was 10 people outside at 2 meters. It was horrible. I was alone in an Airbnb for Shiva. My mother was alone in her home for Shiva, and my brother was alone in an Airbnb, a different Airbnb for Shiva, which I as a proud Canadian, I was embarrassed by how far they went on those rules. But the point is that the funeral wasn't very expensive because it was a graveside thing. I mean, you can't, but that's not the norm. The norm for most people, what we're comfortable with, a typical cremation will cost rarely in excess of $2,000 or $3,000 total, including everything you possibly do. And a typical burial, end of the day, is rarely under $10,000. You can make it cheaper. The Jewish community is wonderful about that. I've never heard of a Jew who had to be cremated because of cost, right? There's all kinds of funds, there's free cemeteries, the Chaver Kadisha step in. There's a million, solutions to it. But at the end of the day, most people, you're talking it's an extra $6,000 or $7,000. For most, that is. I don't know about Northern California. For most, the total cost is $10,000, $12,000, right? Tell me if it's different, in certain places. You said there were 2 issues aside from cost. What was the other one you were thinking?
The other one I was thinking is kind of the romantic notions associated with that. This person hiking the woods.
Right. So, okay. So
that was one. And then the other one is kind of this idea of like, if you're cremated and your remains going to kind of become one with everything.
Okay, so good. I'm glad you know. What's your first name? Devin is saying that there's 2 other reasons for cremation. Let's just go through them quickly. One is this pantheistic idea that like you're one with nature, right? So again, some of this is in the eye of the beholder, and that's what I'm here for, is to see that there's different sides to the issue, different ways of looking at it. I find it interesting that if you take a seed and you put it in the ground, what happens? Plant grows. You take a seed and you burn it and you put it into the ground. What grows? Nothing. There's a soccer pitch, a football pitch in Scotland. There was big signs up stopping people from dumping cremated remains on the soccer pitch because so many fans wanted their eternal rest to be in the soccer pitch, and the cremated remains were destroying the grass because it's bad for nature. So the idea that cremation is somehow connecting with nature, it boggles the mind when you think of what it actually is doing physically, chemically. It's anti-nature, if anything. The first thing is that you mentioned, Devin, was that it's kind of it's got a beautiful. I remember an ad from a cremation company that had this middle-aged woman walking with her elderly mother on the beach. Dolphins are in the background. Sun is going down. Beautiful, like it's the image, right? So we associate idea like it has not, a lot of our associations have nothing to do with the actual, facts. So true, if somebody wants to, no one's stopping you from doing a memorial service out in nature. But, for thousands of years, Jews connected to their loved ones without cremated remains. Okay, and if anything, they were more connected to their loved ones, not less. So again, it's all quite, what I'm pointing out is, look, anybody can make their own decisions and people should make their own decisions. I'm just pointing out that when you go through the reasons for cremation carefully, they're extremely weak or non-existent. The only strong one, really, I think we've made it clear, is cost. So now what we have to do is flip the script and figure out, why is it worth the extra money? Now, what I always tell people is plan early, pre-planning. Not that it'll save you money. I don't think it actually does save the person money. But what it does save is aggravation. Because at the time of mourning, when a family is supposed to be coming together, religion is supposed to bind people together. That's one of the reasons for it, so to speak, right? Suddenly there's financial arguments, and one kid says that the parent wanted burial, the other kid says the kid wanted cremation, one kid wants to spend money, the kid doesn't want to spend money, and it's all a big, so I always tell people, plan it early, pay for it early. That way, the moment of grief can be for grief, right? And it doesn't have to get into financial arguments. By the way, that also solves the big financial hit. Because if you plan it just a few years early, hopefully from your middle age or whatever, that extra $6,000 or $7,000, $5,000, whatever it is, it's really not that much money in the scheme of things. I get it. If you're hit with that at one time, believe me, I know it's a lot of money. But if that's like paid out over a few years, it's a Starbucks visit, on a weekly basis. It's not that much when you just plan it out. So I suggest take care of it. But at the end of the day, most people don't do that, good or bad, right or wrong. That's how it is. So now what I'm going to try and do is explain why I believe that it's worth, why I believe Jews believe, Judaism believes, that it's worth the extra money. Guys, when you proposed to your beloved and you gave her a wedding ring, I assume you did not get it from a Cracker Jack box, right? Like you put some money. There's certain things in life we know are worth a little extra money. They're important. So I'm going to try and make the case that this is one of them, and that yes, it's usually more expensive, but it's worth it. I'm going to move quickly because I want to leave plenty of time for questions and comments. I'm going to leave a bunch of headlines as to the main reasons why I believe Jews have chosen burial for thousands of years. By the way, fascinating that we have. Roman historian Tacitus, when he described us to his compatriots 2,000 years ago, in the few defining character traits of the Jews, he said the Jews bury rather than burn the dead. It stood out. For all of history, it stood out. The Greeks, the Romans, most of the ancients, cremation was the norm. Just think about it. Cremation is usually much easier than burial. Dig in hard dirt. So cremation is the norm. They would burn it. We always buried. Now, obviously, we're following national trends. We're not burying. The majority of Americans are not, and we're following that. So the question is why? Why is it worth the extra money, the extra effort? Number one, surprise to many, including myself. I knew nothing about the subject when I saw that ad in Florida, 15 years ago, whenever it was. Burial is a mitzvah. This is not just bagels and lox. Nothing against bagels and lox. I'm all for, go for it. I grew up on it, but bagels and lox is a custom. Sephardi Jews know nothing of bagel and lox. Yemenite Jews know nothing of bagel and lox. Ethiopian Jews know nothing of bagel and lox. It's sad. I always say that, you marry a Sephardi person, you get better food and better music, So but the point is that bagels and lox is like, we think it's like core to Judaism. It's actually nothing. I mean, it's a nice cultural connection, but it's nothing to do with being burial. Burial is actually a mitzvah. If you want to see it in the Torah itself, it's in Deuteronomy chapter 21. The example that's actually given is fascinating. If an evil criminal, murderer or whatever, is put to death, which, by the way, in Judaism is radically rare, right? The Talmud says that if a court puts someone to death once in 70 years, it's considered a bloodthirsty court, meaning the death penalty is essentially a deterrent in Judaism. Even in the case when all the crazy conditions are going to be fulfilled, whatever, and the person is actually put to death, the Torah specifically says take him down and bury him. All the more so for a normal case. right? So little of the ink in the Torah is spent on the rules of Yom Kippur, the rules of Shabbat. Like, it's fascinating how much Talmud has to explain and fill things in, and there's principles and there's ways of, but like Abraham is buried, and Sarah is buried, and Rachel is buried, and Joseph is buried. Like, time and time again, the Torah goes out of its way to emphasize burial. If I was creating a religion, Doron's religion, I don't think I'd really care how people deal with the bodies. What? Doronism. I don't think I'd really care of how people deal with the bodies. But surprisingly, our tradition cares very much. Huge part of Judaism. Surprising. If a new Jewish community is being formed, what are the first things? Let's say Jews are moving to a certain place they've never been before, and they're setting up a Jewish community. What are the main things, the first things they have to do? Halachically, Jewish law. Set up a school for kids, right? Future. Set up a mikveh, a ritual bath, and a cemetery, chevra kadisha. Though before, by the way, a synagogue, no offense, Reverend. Before buying a Sefer Torah. This is how important it is. Surprisingly important. In the ghetto, in the Lodz ghetto in World War II, there was a rabbi named Ephraim Oshry. He actually survived the war somehow, moved to New York. And he told the following story. He said that he was in the ghetto, and out of the blue, this Nazi SS officer barges into his room in the ghetto and slams the door behind him. Blonde hair, blue-eyed. And Rabbi Oshry thinks that he's about to meet his maker. And surprise upon surprise, this Nazi officer starts speaking to him in perfect Yiddish. Rabbi, I'm a Jew. I have fake papers. I move around a lot. This is how I'm keeping myself alive. But I have a question for you. I'm a very sick man. I have only a few weeks, a month to live. And I know what they're going to do to me. They're going to bury me in a Nazi cemetery with a Nazi cross above my body, surrounded by Nazis for eternity. I could do this for a few months just to survive, but I can't. Can I be cremated to avoid the fate? It's the only way out I can see. Can I be cremated to avoid the fate of being buried in a Nazi cemetery with a Nazi cross over my body? Rabbi Oshry, older rabbi, took the man's hands and says, my dear, dear child, no, you can't. What they do to us, we have no control over. God will take care of whatever he will do. But a Jewish person must do everything they can to provide themselves and other members of the Jewish community with proper Jewish burial. In a normal time, that means you have a chevra kadisha, you have the tahara, you have the kaddish being said, you have everything done right, like we, thank God, can do today. But even in a radical hell on earth time like that, better to be in a Nazi cemetery with a Nazi cross over the body than to choose cremation. Wow. That's the first reason why Jews have emphasized this for thousands of years, because it's a core part of our tradition, of our religion, not bagels and lox. Number two, not just our religion. If you were to make two maps of the world, okay? One map would be a map of monotheism, where people believe in one God, versus, I guess, like atheists believe in no God, and polytheists believe in many gods, like basically monotheism versus non-monotheism. That's one map of monotheism. And the other one is a map of burial versus cremation. And you were to superimpose the two maps, remarkably close overlap. Not perfect, there are exceptions to every rule, but just think about it. India, belief in many gods, cremation. Islamic countries, right? Very fiercely monotheistic. Religiously, a Jew is allowed to pray in a mosque. You have to be careful which one to go into. It's smart, make sure it's a friendly one. But there's no problem religiously. There's no idols. We'll even have pictures up in the back of the synagogue, of people. They won't. I mean, like, they're very, very strictly monotheistic. There's not one crematorium in the Islamic world. All the 21 or 22 Islamic countries, not one crematorium. They're not allowed. It doesn't exist, right? They got it from us, obviously. Israel, by the way, 9 million people in the state of Israel. There's one crematorium. Very small percentage. It was rebuilt, and it's a small percentage of people Because of movies and television, it's growing, but we're talking 2-3% max. That's all we're talking about. Monotheistic feeling in the country. By the way, Europe, interestingly, for well over 1,000 years, Catholic Europe banned cremation completely until the 1950s, when Europe became post-Christian Europe and people started demanding it, and the Catholic Church relaxed its rules. But for well over 1,000 years, there was no cremation whatsoever. Once you have post-Christian Europe, which is it's the most secular continent that they say right now, there is cremation everywhere. It's the norm in Europe. Even here in the States, there's a difference. Now there's acceptance to every rule, and I don't like these categorizations, but the truth is, if you look at what's called the Bible Belt compared to the secular coasts, cremation rates are far higher in the secular coasts than the Bible Belt. There is this intuitive, intrinsic connection between people who believe in one God and people who choose burial. We do not have time to explain why. There are actually books on the subject. There's a lot of different opinions and literature. I'm going to share with you just my own gut summary feeling. Monotheists know the phrase from the Bible, from the Torah, that every human being is created in the image of God, B'Tselem Elokim. Now, that's not a physical thing. God forbid, God doesn't have an image, but it means that somehow our image is holy. And you don't mess with that holiness. You don't mess with that image of God. That's why monotheists stay away from cremation. I think it's an intuitive understanding of what feels right and what feels wrong. By the way, the connection is even stronger than just that feeling. We have some very good examples of it. I'll give you one. Do you remember Hurricane Katrina when it hit the Bay of Florida? What's it called there? The Florida coast, Louisiana, that area. It's 2005, 2006, 2005. Okay, so there were a number of synagogues that were completely destroyed, flooded, in a hurricane, and there were a relatively large number. I forget how many, but like at least 6 or 8 or something. Torah scrolls that were damaged beyond repair. Now, Torah scrolls regularly need maintenance, so to speak. Like the ink can fall off. You take it to a scribe, to a sofer, and he can fix it. Right? It happens all the time. But what do you do with a Torah scroll that cannot be fixed? There was a big ceremony, it was on television. They buried the Torah scrolls, right? Every cemetery that I know, a Jewish cemetery, has a little section for the holy writings. If you've heard of the Cairo Geniza, right? So Cairo Geniza is a set of parchments that was found. It opened up a whole world of knowledge about medieval Jews. And it was sealed off in the back of the synagogue because you're not allowed to get rid of it. They treat them respectfully. So if it's actual Torah scroll, you bury it. Other things you just have to seal off, whatever. So the point is that a Torah scroll is the holiest object we have, and we bury it, right? When it's done, when it's gone, we can't be repaired anymore, we bury it. Now, here's my question. God forbid, hypothetical only, Rabbi, okay? Hypothetically, God forbid, there is a fire in the synagogue. You're passing by, and the synagogue is on fire. God forbid. And you want to go in and be a hero and risk your life to save the Torah scrolls because they're the holiest things we have. Are you allowed to? So if the firemen tell you, no problem, buddy, fire's out, just a little bit of smoke, but if you don't want if you get ruined, take it out, of course, go and be the hero. But if there is any risk to your life in Jewish law, you're not allowed to risk your life to save the Torah scroll. Torah scroll is the holiest object. Every human being is holy. You are holy. You're not allowed to risk your life. By the way, doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. Doesn't matter if you're old or you're young. Doesn't matter if you're healthy or you're sick. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter Cohen Levy. Doesn't matter if you are observant or non-observant or somewhere. It doesn't matter. You are holier than a Torah scroll. We bury a Torah scroll because of its holiness. All the more so we bury a person. Fascinatingly, well, it's kind of funny, I guess, but I can virtually guarantee that when you were 8 years old and your pet dog Spot died, your mother did not say, okay, honey, you bring over Spot, I'll fire up the barbecue. What did your mother say? Let's bury it. We bury things we love. We bury treasure. We burn the garbage. In Jewish philosophy, in Jewish ideology, what is life-giving? Water. That's washing the hand at the Pesach Seder, the Passover Seder. That's the mikvah, right? That's a connection to life. It's living waters, right? Fire is destruction, is death. That's the way that we see everything. So it's not just a Torah scroll that's buried. It's a human being, a holy human being that is buried. A few other ideas, and then we'll get into your questions and comments. Raise your hand. Online, you can do it as well. Raise your hand if you have ever visited a Jewish convent or a Jewish monastery. Trick question, I know you didn't, because there aren't any. Ever think about that? Ever think about that? If you ask Catholics who the holiest person on the planet is, they will most likely say the Pope. The Pope is celibate, does not get married, does not get involved in intimate relations, right? Ask an Eastern mystic who the holiest person is, they will probably say the Dalai Lama or somebody like that also. Celibate, abstinent. There are millions, if not hundreds of thousands, of huge numbers of nuns and priests in the Far East, celibate, do not have any sexual relations at all. Same thing with Catholics. Now, why is that? You think these people are stupid? They're not stupid. They're as smart as you and I are. It's a different belief system. They believe on a fundamental level that if you want to be spiritual, you want to reach up to God, you have no choice but to deny the physical. That's why they will not be intimate. They will not get married. They will not have children. They'll sleep on hard benches. They won't. I mean, it's a complete either or. Physical and spiritual opposite of each other. You want to be spiritual, then ignore the physical. Ignore the physical. We, on the other hand, the Jewish tradition, we have a very different view of reality, of physical reality. God is a good God that created a good physical world. You have to be smart about it. And I'm the rider on the horse, not the horse on the right. I get that. But you're supposed to enjoy it. God is it's a good physical world. On Shabbat, we have great food. You're supposed to hopefully meet the right person, get married, have a beautiful life. Physicality is good. No wonder that we treat the body very respectfully. If you've ever been to a tahara, purification, cleansing of the body, just like a baby is born and the baby is washed and the baby is wrapped, so too at the end of life, the body is washed, the body is wrapped. It's beautiful and it's holy and it is sensitive, and the body has holiness. Now this is a how would you say a chiddush, Rabbi? How would you say a novel idea, new idea? We're all used to, from modern Western culture, we're used to the idea that the soul is eternal, the soul is holy. Judaism says something much deeper than that. Yes, the soul is eternal, the soul is holy. The body is also holy, not just the soul. And you treat it with tremendous respect. By the way, this connection leads to another implication when you think about it. Let me give an example, crazy example, okay? God forbid, woman loses her husband of 50 years, comes back from the cemetery, takes off her black dress, hops in the shower, puts on a red dress, high heels, does her makeup, and that very night goes out to the bars looking for a new guy. Sound normal to you? Certainly not, right? When you're partners, you don't just move on that quickly, right? She's been with him for 50 years. It's not a quick change at all. Body and soul are partners in Judaism. The soul has partnered with the body. I couldn't give charity without my hand. I couldn't, hug, make somebody feel good without my arm. Like the soul needs the body, and the body needs the soul. They're together. So the body and soul are partners, and they don't just go their own separate ways. This is why our mystical tradition says that the Jewish mourning practices, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G, the mourning practices we think of as being for the living, for the mourners. 7 days of Kaddish, 7 days of Shiva, a year of Kaddish. That's true. But according to the mystical sources of Judaism, they are for the soul on an even deeper level. For the first 7 days, the soul is still very tied to its body and does not immediately leave and go upstairs, whatever that means. After a week of Shiva, but during that week, by the way, it goes back and forth between the body and the Shiva house to hear what's being said about it. That's the tradition. It then goes up, but it's still connected to that place. It's the body and the soul are connected. The soul knows what's happening with its body and is concerned about what's happening with its body and wants its body to have proper Jewish burial. One last idea, and then I'll open it up to you. I don't know where I got this from. I think it's true, but if not, it could be true. I have this monologue in my mind of an older Jewish guy that calls together his kids and says, guys, I want to tell you something serious, so just listen up for a minute. I may not have been the best Jew on planet Earth. Some things I did, some things I didn't do. To be honest, I didn't have much education, and looking back, maybe I do things differently. I don't know. But I do know one thing. I was born a Jew, and I'm proud to be a Jew. And when I die, I want to be buried as Jews have been buried for 3,000 years. I want it all. I want the rabbi saying the prayers. I want the Kaddish. I want the little bit of earth from the land of Israel. I want the Chevra Kadisha to do the Tahara, the cleansing. I want the body. I want my last statement on planet Earth to be, I may not have been a perfect Jew, but I'm a proud Jew. So I don't know about you, but that actually really touches me. I once heard someone say that there are worse things than death. Have you ever spent an evening with an insurance salesman? So there are worse things. It's a tough subject. But when you think about it, and we step away from the actual grief at the moment, where it's hard to really talk about anything, we start to understand a little bit of why Jews have struggled for this for thousands of years, why it's been such a priority. So is it worth a little more money? Yes. It costs a little more. I agree. I suggest we spread the word. The job of the Chevra Kadisha, the job is to provide Jewish burial, kosher Jewish burial for as many Jews as possible. That's the task. It's a holy task. The only organization that I know in Jewish history called the Holy Society, the Chevra Kadisha. Amazing. And for us, as Jews today in the modern world, we have an opportunity, meaning make your own decision, hopefully based on good information, and to spread the word to others, because there's a lot of misinformation out there and lack of knowledge out there. And a lot of people are making decisions based on things that are not necessarily true. So that's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much for coming, for joining in person online. I'm glad to have any questions, comments that you may have. Sure. We'll just look at the chat. Okay. Hi, people on chat. Okay. Alex asks, very interesting. Thank you. Do you have an opinion on accelerated decomposition? Yes. You're good. You're good. That's like the third one tonight. I'm impressed. Okay. The question is on accelerated decomposition. And for those that don't know, that means that there are certain methods. Some are chemical, some are a biofuel, some are mulch, all different versions of having decomposition happen quicker. So yes, Alex, I actually do have a thought on it. I hope this will be of interest to you. I notice, and this is not scientific, but it's true. I notice that there are sort of two extremes of dealing with death that at first sound like opposites, but they're really quite similar. Follow my train of thought. There are some people that hate the idea of death and they want to slow it down as much as possible. That is embalming, that is metal caskets, that is above ground mausoleums, right? It's going to happen anyway, but I'm going to fight it as much as I can. I don't like what's happening. I'm going to slow it down as much as I can. There's another view of what's happening. At first, it seems like the complete opposite. I don't like what's happening. I don't accept what's happening. I'm not comfortable with what's happening, so I'm going to speed it up as much as I can. That's a button for cremation. That is Alex, accelerated decomposition. That is, let's not do 7 days. Let's do 3 days of Shiva. Now in some places, 1 day of Shiva. In Germany, by the way, today, it is very uncommon to have any funeral service whatsoever. It just who I don't want to deal with this. It's unpleasant. Thomas Lynch, who was an undertaker from Michigan, who was also a poet. He wrote a book on the subject, and he said, forgive my coarseness here, he said that many people operate under the toilet assumption. Something's unpleasant, I just want to flush it, get rid of it. So there's these two extremes. Some people speed up the process, some people slow down the process. But at the end of the day, they're both messing with the process. And listen to what Judaism says. Judaism says something fascinating. 6 days a week, work, improve the world, change the world, make it better. On the seventh day, you sit back and you realize, I'm not in control of this world. Your whole life, you're producing, you're changing, you're doing. And the last decision, my last statement, Judaism says, let me simply down to sleep. I am not going to try and speed it up. I am not going to try and slow it down. I am not claiming control. I am accepting my mortality, my humanity. God runs the world. So that is my philosophical problem with accelerated decomposition, Alex. I don't know in Jewish law. You have to ask, rabbinic authority. But to me, it's not even about the Jewish law. It's about the actual what you're trying to do there. What's the famous idea at a funeral that ashes to what? Everything there's a season. That's a good one. I was thinking ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Like it's the cycle of nature. The cycle. It's an acceptance. In other words, my last act on earth should be one of acceptance, not one of rejection, control. Okay, I'm looking in the chats for this. Here it is. For more questions, thank you guys. Okay, I see there's comments. I'm just gonna go for the questions for now. Someone wants a book in Vancouver, Rabbi. Good luck. Okay. Yeah, there you go. Okay. Anybody here have any questions, comments, anything you want to share? Please.
I have 2 or 3 things.
Sure.
Given a lot to think about.
Thank you.
On the in-ground burial, I got the bit about having overwhelmed,
Yeah.
all that. I think not in Coma, but I think this was the Levaya that I went to at the National Cemetery. There was a lot of plastic. There was like the whole book. I don't know the meaning of that, but it seems like avoiding plastic is a good idea.
I
The
agree.
thing that I have seen.
David's pointing out avoiding plastics. I think avoiding plastic in life is a good idea, certainly in death. Yeah.
But the thing that I have seen a lot in Colma around here is concrete. The concrete liners. Is there a way that we could replace that with wood? Is that a legal thing? Is it a practice thing? Is it a thing?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The question was, what about all the use? First of all, I haven't ever heard of plastic before. It's the first time that you're mentioning that I've ever seen it or heard of it. I'm around a lot. I don't think it's very common at all. Shouldn't happen, but
In Jewish.
correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. Again, non-Jewish burials, I don't know. I've never heard of Jewish burials, and I've been around a lot of them. In terms of the concrete liners, so there is no need in Jewish law to have a concrete liner whatsoever. It's usually a physical need. They want to avoid the land moving, flooding, things like that. So, so if it can be done with wood, there's no problem. It's cheap and easy to do with concrete. I'm not sure how bad the concrete actually is for the environment, by the way. I know that sounds kind of, I know, but I'm saying, I'm not sure that cutting down trees to do it would be better. Like, I don't know if your solution is, you have to like, so I don't know. In Israel, they do use concrete, but not anywhere near, it's a few blocks. It's not anywhere near as much as used here in the States. Yeah.
The second topic was on younger people, younger Jews especially. As we know, I mean, we're all pretty connected to the community. Lots of people are unaffiliated. Lots of people, I mean, the Bay Area has a lot of young Jewish techies.
Yeah.
Okay? Maybe they will make arrangements with their family. Maybe they will have a plot here. Maybe they'll have a cult. I suspect a lot of them will not, and will opt for the other thing. How can we, other than all of the last hour order, explain how important it is, how important the area is, and to a greater extent, how important being connected to the community, through organization, through ritual, through whatever, because there's a broader problem there, but at least in the narrow, I suspect that a lot of them, all of the things being equal, would say, this isn't even a question, cremation, all done.
Right. Okay. The question is, how do you get to younger people in general about Jewish connections and specifically about this issue? The second question about how do you connect young Jews to their heritage? It's a $64,000 question that the Jewish community has spent billions of dollars on and has not yet found a solution. We all hope birthright would be the solution. Birthright's good, but didn't really make a huge, massive change. We still have the same problem 20 years later. Again, it's a good thing to go to Israel. I'm just saying, Jewish day schools for a while, Jewish camps, like, the only solution I have really, is Chabad. And I'll say this, I'm not a Chabadnik. I didn't grow up Chabad. It's not my bread, but like the more I travel the Jewish world, the more I see how, what they're doing for the Jewish people is just incredible with love and acceptance and just, growing beyond belief and positivity. So I think that's the real hope for the Jewish people. In terms of this subject, I'll be honest, I have never succeeded in getting young people interested in this subject. They're just not ready to hear it. They don't want to think about it. They don't think they have to think about it. They think they're going to live forever. My talks almost definitely are middle-aged people and above. Now, again, if you have courses about the Jewish life cycle, things like that, it comes in a long way. But that's people who are already affiliated. That's not what you're asking about. So I don't know. I wish I did know. I think you're asking an excellent question.
You reminded me I will have to go see Harold and Watt again. It's been a while. And I think part of your answer on the cost issue is talk to Sharon, talk to Kara. Everybody should have a plan. And so it's not just call David when there's a problem, but it's call David and go pull out your file. We already have a file, we've got an arrangement, you know what you want, it's a drone, you've got a plot, you're all set.
I'm with you.
Okay.
I would claim, if I, just before we go on, let me make a caveat to my previous answers. I'm just thinking, I don't want to just leave it to Chabad, as great as Chabad is, but, and I mentioned this before, I know there are some people here from the Chevra Kadisha, and, I actually think that Chevra Kadishas today have a much greater, can have a much greater role than they have throughout much of history. Much of history, they were just reactive, providing burials, which is what we should do today and we do today. But it's the role of the Chevra Kadishas to get out there to spread the word. So I'll just give an example. When I was a kid, Hanukkah was celebrated, indoors at, your Hanukkah maybe in the window or whatever. And then Lubavitcher Rebbe, brought into the consciousness that, no, but we need to make this much more public. See if the huge menorahs outside, right? In Jewish law, 500 years ago, there was nothing about outside, no such thing. It's inside, or it's at the house or at the front door. But he understood that it's a new generation, and you need. So I actually think that it's a new generation of Chevra Kadishas, and the only real way to get out there is to see yourself in that possible role of getting the word out. Yes, other questions, comments, anyone? I have great love and respect. Oh, the question was, where do I see the rabbi's role? We expect rabbis to be so good at so many things. They are giving sermons, they are counseling, pastoral care, they are fundraising, they are teaching, it's like, and they do it like remarkably well, actually, when you think about it all. Few and far between are the rabbis that can proactively get out there and change an issue in a city. They have enough to do with their own congregants. So I think, just, hosting a talk is a good thing. Giving out books is a good thing. Spreading the word. NASC, the National Association of Chevra Kadishas, everybody's own international, it's actually an international organization of the Chevra Kadishas. They have all kinds of material that you can have in funeral homes, pamphlets and brochures and information. Listen, people, it's free world, and it should be free world. People should decide, for themselves. That being said, Many people are not getting the information and they're making their decisions based on just misinformation. So we should try and get out there and get as much education as possible on the subject. What else? I don't have any other solution. Yes.
It's a role that both, groups place together with the higher education to put the education out there. And by the time that the higher education meets with the family, it's already,
Yeah.
The second stage.
Yeah.
The first stage.
100%. 100%.
I think the two have to work together.
Well said. Well said. The two have to work together. Yeah. Well said. We have to work together. Any other questions? Comments, please, Devin.
So what if you think, especially based on what you've seen, that a Jewish mortuary or kind of fiduciary should dissuade individuals who had planned or cremation against it, and or incentivize those individuals towards burial?
So the question was, to what extent I think a Jewish mortuary should try and dissuade people Jews who've chosen cremation and or incentivize the burial option. So I would, just me speaking on behalf of myself, okay, just because you asked me the question, so I'll share my 2 cents. I am pained when I meet people that, whether they're officially in the Chabad Kadisha or they're not in the Chabad Kadisha, but they are involved in Jewish end of life process. And although their intentions are, I'm sure, very good, I'm not judging anybody personally. Human beings, we make our own decisions based on the information we have. It's not a bad person, just doing, I'm pained when they end up doing the opposite of what they really think they're doing. In other words, let's take a simple case of someone in a Chabad Kadisha. Someone in a Chabad Kadisha, whole job for 3,000 years is providing kosher Jewish burial. So when I hear of people in the Chabad Kadisha that are facilitating cremations, I'm like, it's like
When it's going to be
like a rabbi on Yom Kippur who's providing food. I'm not talking about sick people. It's the complete, So when my book came out, when Cremation and Burial came out, I actually thought the Jewish funeral homes would be giving them out, and by the hundreds or the thousands. And by the way, I make it very cheap. $5 you can get these books and give them out in bulk, right? It's not that's basic cost. And the reason that I thought it would happen was because funeral homes and cemeteries are, in my mind, extremely short-sighted in their own financial interests, because at the end of the day, they can profit a couple $1,000s from a cremation. The electricity is $50, $75. That's all it is. The whole process, if it's more profitable to have burials and plots and maintenance. But people didn't want to rock the boat and offend anybody. And we're all so afraid of offending each other, which I'm not into offending people. Like, I don't, it's good not to offend people, okay? But we're all so afraid of it that nobody talks about it. And they end up doing things that, if you really think about it, go against their fundamental principles of why they got into this in the first place. So I can't answer your question of what mortuary Jewish funeral home should do. I will tell you that that I have respect for people who are able to say, listen, here's some literature, we don't do this, but, I respect you, whatever you want to do, you can go elsewhere. I'm not like, you don't have to like force them and tie them down. So the second part of your question was incentivize. Boy, yeah, okay, let me leave this subject for a minute and then we'll come back to it like in 30 seconds. One of my biggest pet peeves of the Jewish community in North America, as good intentioned and as generous as it is, and of course it is, and I get all the positives, I'm not negating that. Why are day schools so expensive? The future of our community clearly relies on Jewish education of the young. And in most places, it's $20,000, if not more, a kid per year. Okay, not even close. There you go. Okay, so so it's a ridiculous mistake which we are paying for in the assimilation terms. It's a terrible mistake. Jewish education should be for everybody and affordable for everybody. If there wasn't money, I get that. But let's be honest, we're putting millions and billions of dollars into new Jewish museums and Holocaust museums. I'm an Holocaust educator. I take groups to Europe. I'm all for it, right? But like, really, what's your price? Like, so now that's just my own pet peeve. I just thank you for letting me vent. But back to your question, understanding that the majority of American Jews do not really have a very strong Jewish education and are very influenced by Western society, movies and television. This has become the norm. So why are we allowing a situation where only the most committed and knowledgeable would choose to do a proper burial? Because it's an extra $5,000 to $6,000. Like, really? There are several cemeteries. Everybody's own has one in Florida, there's one in New York, I'm sure there's one in California somewhere that are low cost or free. Like, the Jewish community could still today, make this very affordable. No offense to funeral homes or cemeteries. Why do they all have to be for profit? Why can't there be?
This one is not.
Restaurants, it's restaurants, schools, technically everything is a premium when you want to be Jewish, in anywhere you go. So, you knock off this one, you knock off that one, what comes first, what comes second?
Well, respectfully, I would say like this. I'm the one who pointed out the day schools. I agree with you 100%. Restaurants, okay, so.
But in general, everything is more.
Right, but my point is that if we as a Jewish community want people to choose burial, then either we have to really make this a priority of education, which I don't see happening, to be honest, because there are so many other priorities that are probably bigger priorities, like why stay Jewish at all, right? So I don't see this as being, going to be happening as a major part of education, or we have to make it affordable. And
but the education will start with the children education for the congregation, with the rabbi, right? Not when they come back to the.
And the question is, when start the education? Look, this is why I'm here. Yeah, I agree with you all. This is why I'm here. Yeah.
So we've run out of time, so we're gonna
Sure.
close over here, and stick around.
Can I say one more quick thing? So I once heard a comedian say that what was the line? The line was that I don't want to achieve immortality through my work. I want to achieve it through not dying. Right? So the point is, we're uncomfortable with this, but it's an important subject and people are making this decision. So take this opportunity. You heard this guy from Israel, come and give a talk on it. Use it as an excuse to talk about the subject. There's a website I recommend called peacefulreturn.org. PACE, peacefulreturn.org has a lot of information on it. Of course, Chabad.org has a video of me and tons of other, people, educators, rabbis, all kinds of stuff on it. Just use it as an excuse to spread the word and get people thinking. That's the best we can do, is just bring information, education to people. Thank you very much, Rabbi. Pleasure. Thank you all.
Thank you all so much for joining us. And if you want to stick around and engage online, that is a possibility. You can leave your questions online in the chat, and I will forward them to Rabbi Doron to respond, and I will get back to you. So you can definitely add your questions if there's still any more questions, but we definitely went over time. And I want to thank you all for joining us. And once again, thank you so much, Sinai, for being here and also co-sponsoring, and Jewish Family and Children's Services, and a big yashar koach to Doron for a fantastic, informative, and thought-provoking and intense discussion. But isn't this what life is all about?